So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the kind invitation to come over. Thanks to Marv for this wonderful introduction. I'm going to talk about electricity spot market design, and this is joint work with two of my students, Mette Ahunbey and Johannes Knör. I thought to set the stage, I tell you a little bit about the European day-ahead market, and I think this has a remarkable history, but particularly in the past 10 years, there have been a lot of regional exchanges, and they've been coupled. So today, as we speak, 98.6% of the EU consumption is coupled, and this amounts to 200 million euro average daily value of match trades. So if you do the math, this is like 73 billion. So this is a huge, huge computational market. I'm saying computational because essentially the underlying clearinghouse, once a day, the exchanges that send their asks and bids to the centralized clearinghouse, they run a series of mixed integer programming problems, non-convex problems. They are hard to solve, but they manage to do this in time. And it's a series of allocation and pricing problems, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later as we speak. As we heard from Mar, in Europe, we have zonal prices. So for example, we have 1 day ahead market price all over Germany. So this is different to the nodal prices we have here in the States. But they did actually a nodal market simulation. They means the NSUE, this is the Organization of Transmission Service Operators in Europe, in the EU. And to give you a bit of an idea of the size of the problems that need to be solved, so they had to cover 16,000 generators and batteries, some sources 25,000 nodes and 22,000 lines. So this is a huge mixed integer linear program. As a matter of fact, for the purpose of this study, they only solved the linear programming relaxation because it turned out too hard. Right? And maybe you want to keep that in mind for the last slide. So, as you know, obviously these are important markets, but also not all states, countries are using markets, right? So in many jurisdictions, there are electronic power systems, and they're often operated by vertically integrated utilities, and they own the generation, they own transmission and distribution assets, and they do all of it, right? There are ISO markets in the States, and there is recommendations by FERC to actually move to ISO markets. And I think one of the main arguments for using markets is, increases competition and so on and so forth. But on a theoretical level, it's the welfare theorems. Right? It's also obvious that if you look at the original Aero-de-Broglie models, they tend to be quite different to the types of electricity markets that we see today. And I want to pull out two aspects that are different. The first of it is these are coupled markets in a way. So I was telling you about these 25,000 nodes. So this is what you see on the right-hand side here. And a bit of an illustration. So each node is a market, and they're interconnected with these transmission lines. And if you have excess supply on one node, you can compensate some demand on another node and so on, right? And the second is, and that's also no news to anyone here in the room, there are non-convexities, and these matter, obviously, right? So, and there's a long history of thought on non-convexities. So what I'm going to do for the remaining time is I want to talk about these two aspects. I want to show you quickly that the coupledness is without loss, but when we talk about these non-convexities, that needs a bit of more thought. So from a bird's eye view, what such a market maker, an ISO market, has to do is he wants to maximize a utilitarian welfare function subject to a demand supply constraint, right? So the XI here are essentially positive and negative quantities, and all good. So we're essentially maximizing gains from trade. So what the buyers are willing to bid minus what the sellers are asking for, right? And if we have a centralized market and we have concave value functions, convex costs, you get everything you want by essentially just drawing on a Lagrangian dual, right? So essentially what you see down here, the Lagrangian multiplier P is really tells you about the marginal value of an additional megawatt hour, say. And what we did in a motivation for a paper is we essentially looked at coupled markets, and it's actually fairly straightforward to show that you can extend or get a version of the welfare theorems for coupled markets with quasi-linear and convex preferences. And it would say, as you would expect, if you have P star being the prices and Z star the allocation being a Walrasian equilibrium, then this allocation maximizes welfare. And second welfare theorem, if C star is a welfare maximizing allocation, then it can be supported by a set of prices. Right? What I want to highlight though is the following. First, we do not assume any type of differentiability, so you can have discrete convex functions. The proof does not rely on any type of fixed point theorem. So we essentially draw on Fentel-Young inequalities from convex optimization. And what is maybe more, so if you have this type of convexity in these coupled markets, then it's not only an existence theorem, it's constructive, right? So you can draw on, say, some subgradient algorithms and solve these problems to optimality. And what you get, and this should set the base for the coming slides, is the usual design desiderata that we are after, right? So we want to have efficiency and demand supply balance, and this just follows from primal optimality of the welfare maximization problem. And we want to have NB freeness and budget balance, and they essentially follow from strong duality and complementary slackness conditions, right? So all good. What is a little more challenging are the non-convexities, as you would have expected. And there are two sources of non-convexities in electricity markets that I want to highlight. The first are simply due to the physics, right? So the types of high voltage networks that we operate in Europe and in the States are AC networks. So you have reactive power. So essentially what the market maker would have to solve is the so-called AC optimal power flow problem. So on the right-hand side, this is a well-known picture, and the colored manifold that you see over there, this is essentially the feasible region. You would need to find an optimum on this feasible region, and that's computationally very hard. It's a QCQP, right? And we can't solve large problem sizes of those. So what ISO markets do is they solve these mixed integer programming problems. They linearize the line losses. They treat the problem as if it was a DC network. And these are these DC-OPF mixed integer programming problems that I was referring to before, right? So there's been a lot of progress on that front. And BIC, I think, was one of the driving forces behind this ARPA-E grid optimization competition to find better kind of tighter convex relaxations for this underlying AC feasible region or AC-OPF, right? And there's, amazing results on that. What we did in a recent study is we looked at the prices that come out of it. And just, one of the results that I found interesting is when we looked at the DC-OPF prices, they often led to very large but unnecessary price spikes, right? Unnecessary in the sense that we looked at the AC-OPF feasible solution, and this is the one that the second-order Cohen program found as well. This did not have this allocation, a slightly different allocation. There was no congestion, right? Yet the DC-OPF led to very high prices, right? And this is important because on these electricity markets, you have these, congestion costs, and people want to hedge against them. They use financial transmission rights as forwards, and then you want to get the underlying right. So this getting to tighter relaxations really is important also for the prices. The second source of non-convexities is due to preferences, and we've heard about that from Mara already. And there are plenty of reasons, technical reasons. So there are non-convexities due to the startup costs that you mentioned and shutdown costs of gas turbines. They're not going to go away anytime soon. There are non-convexities due to curtailment of certain renewables, transmission and distribution costs, and so on and so forth. So this is the simplest example that I could come up with. So we have one seller who is submitting a package bid. So it's a block bid. This is the decisive characteristic of the European bid language. It's really a combinatorial exchange, what we're looking at. And he wants to sell 2 megawatt hours for $30. And we have two buyers. They are all both interested in 1 megawatt hour, willing to pay up to $10 or $28, right? So quite obviously, you get gains from trade, namely 8. There is demand supply equivalence, so 2 megawatt hours. You could have budget balance. However, if you want to have linear and anonymous prices, and Walrasian prices are linear and anonymous, you run into these issues, right? So if you charge less than $10, such that buyer one would break even, well, then obviously the seller would make a loss, and vice versa. If the price is higher, well, then buyer one would make a loss. So there is no easy way out. right? So you need, this is fundamental. And obviously, so we are not only violating NB freeness, we are violating individual rationality. The guy makes a loss. So several ways on how to go about it. Obviously, you need to relax some of these axioms from the wealthy theorems. So, and what the US Americans do here is essentially the relevant market is the real-time market. You really want to get it right in the real time, and you maximize welfare. You insist on that, but you relax budget values. Right? And you pay make-whole payments. In Europe, the opposite is being done. So essentially, the key market is the day-ahead market, and you stick with a suboptimal outcome, but you don't have to pay any make-whole payments, right? And I want to briefly talk about both approaches, and they have their pros and cons. So this is well known. So those are the four axioms that we're after. And obviously, in the US market, we want to enforce efficiency, full efficiency. And the question really is, what is the order of magnitude of the deviations that we get? So how much budget violations do we get? And what you need to know, for those of you who have not looked into electricity markets, so there's a long history on how to do pricing in electricity markets, but there are two key papers, I would say, that really made a big impact in the industry. The first one from 2003 is by Bill Hogan and Ring on convex hull pricing. So this in general is, intractable, but there are, for certain types of the DCOPF, there is the ELMP, and this is essentially from the DCOPF, you take the linear programming relaxation, take the duals, and those will be your prices, essentially, very roughly. The second is by Bichler, actually, and his co-authors, a very well-known paper in EJR, and it's the IP pricing. You solve the mixed integer programming problem, you fix the integer variables to optimal values, and then you take those duals. So in both of these, there will be situations like the one that I was showing you before. Some might actually make a loss, right? So what you can do now is you could either pay this global lost opportunity cost. So, if one generator would do better at those prices with a different dispatch, well, you just compensate the guy, right? This is actually not what is being done in most ISOs. What most ISOs do is they pay these make-whole payments just to make him break even, right? And then this is a very transparent market. If he would still deviate from the efficient allocation, you stipulate a penalty, right? And that's obviously what you can do. This has led to a number of concerns. One actually brought up very prominently by the US FERC, saying that these side payments are sometimes for some of the generators very, very high. So this is a quote from a FERC order saying that the use of side payments can undermine the market's ability to send actionable price signals. So you want to worry about this. And the second is, so if you were to, most ISOs are actually using IP pricing, but if you were to move to ELMPs or convex hull pricing, it's kind of very well known, and this is a quote from Shiro, very nice survey paper, that convex hull pricing might produce positive congestion prices for transmission lines that are not congested. And again, here, you want to get these congestion prices, right? Because they are the underlying for financial transmission rates. So this is important. And that's, by the way, a bit of an advantage of IP pricing, that at least assuming that the transmission service operators are convex, well, then you would not incur these deviations. We measure that by local lost opportunity costs. I'm not going into the details of that, but that's one way to measure how far off we are with respect to this congestion prices. So one of the things that we did recently is we said, well, why don't we model this differently? So in one way you could think about is, why don't you model the pricing problem as a multi-objective optimization problem, right? So why don't we go after both the minimal make-whole payments to make the generators and participants break even, and these local lost opportunity costs that are a measure for these congestion prices and how accurate they are. And we kind of introduced a new type of multi-objective optimization approach. We called it the join. It's parameter-free, doesn't need any weighting like scalarization. And we tested it on a large data set from the European Union. So this is the data set that they used for the bid zone review for this nodal pricing simulation that they did. So what you can see on the right-hand side is that indeed, if you optimize these two design desiderata, then the make-whole payments that you get are way lower than what you get with IP pricing. And on the other hand, the make-whole payments that you get are way lower than if you were to minimize only the make-whole payments, say, right? And so you can do a lot. The paper has a number of propositions as well that you can prove on certain characteristics of this pricing rule. It's guaranteed to have lower make-whole payments than IP pricing, and the prices are participant-wise Pareto optimal. I think the only thing I want to leave with you is, well, you can do better than maybe some of the pricing rules that have been out there if you focus on multiple goals. Let me get to the second approach. This is, let me call it the European approach. Let's give up on full efficiency, right, and welfare maximization. And what the European Union does is they, in this clearinghouse, they run the PCR euphemia algorithm. So this is, as I said, this series of mixed integer programming problems that they solve. So they start with the welfare maximization problem, then they try to find linear and anonymous prices. And if that doesn't work, they add additional cuts until they find it. But each of these rounds takes another mixed integer programming problem to solve. And they are already running into computational issues here, right? So they're going to smaller market time units. So ultimately, they need to do something about it. And there are no bounds, kind of. So a couple of years ago, for a very different market of fishery access rights, we looked at a very similar problem, and we proposed an optimization formulation that does everything in one optimization. So essentially, you're trying to find the welfare maximizing allocations subject to linear and anonymous prices, right? And you can then prove some bounds that are getting better as the market increases, should also not be a surprise here, and so on and so forth. What I found a very fascinating contribution was by Paul Milgram and Mitch Watt just last year. It's a paper that I encourage you to look at. And what they did is they suggest a market with two price vectors. So why not? And the idea is simply, if you have these non-convexities, there might be some excess supply, right? So you charge the buyers a little bit more to cover that excess supply, right? And you can still get linear anonymous prices, but you have these two price vectors. And what they show is that the mechanism is nearly efficient, nearly individually rational, incentive compatible. And what is maybe more, it relies on convex optimization only. And that is kind of exciting, because I was telling you about these huge problem sizes that we have. They also have a bound form welfare first welfare theorem that is actually independent of the number or the size of the market, the number of participants, and still gives you bounds, which is nice. So what we did quite recently is we implemented that based on data from the RP grid optimization challenge, which was interesting. And we just wanted to see, well, how big are these trade-offs really, right? And one of the challenges, I have to say, is you need to find rounding techniques. So if you stick to convex optimization, in this case, it would be linear programming, well, then you still have to round to a feasible integer solution. And that's a bit of a challenge really here. But, we kind of mastered that, came up with some solutions. And the interesting observation was that the efficiency loss is, say, 1%, sometimes maybe up to 2%, which is fairly low as compared to the fishery market that we looked at, where we had 5, 6, 7% efficiency loss. And if you consider that we are talking maybe about, say, the day-ahead market, well, then maybe the remaining inefficiencies can be fixed with an intraday market. And by the way, weather conditions are changing anyway, right? So maybe you can live with some sort of an efficiency loss on such a market, and should just give you some ideas here. So let me get to an end here. So what I wanted to convey here is really electricity spot markets are very large computational markets, right? And you need to solve them, and pricing is a concern. What is being done in US ISO markets is the relaxed budget balance. It's one of the design desiderata that can lead to very high make-whole payments, which is a concern even to the regulators. It might, depending on which rule you choose, also lead to wrong congestion signals. And I was trying to convince you that there are ways to maybe improve on both. You never get it, perfect, but you can do better. And the second is, you might decide to give up on full efficiency. Maybe, you relax this a little bit. And then in the European market, they use this PCR euphemia algorithm. This is computationally very expensive. As I said, they are moving from 1 hour to 15-minute market time units. So this blows up the problem even further. So it's getting harder and harder to solve. This is actually at the focus of the ESTAC market design group as we speak, right? So people are really concerned about this. We don't have really bounds on the welfare loss. It's really a bit of a heuristic approach. And even there are some ideas, I think, on the horizon where we could maybe improve the allocation and pricing of these very large markets. With that, I want to come to an end and hand over to Pathak.